Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex, coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of... At last, the time has come for me to review the Southern Gothic horror novel by Robert R. McCammon, Usher's Passing. Now, before I get started, I would like to note that I had intended to review this with my Halloween 2023 book review lineup, but the time had simply gotten away with me and the holiday came and went before I could review this. Also, I would like to add that even though I went into this work hoping to gain some Halloween vibes, it honestly didn't provide that. Even still, the book does take place during the autumn months, so if you're a mood reader, September or October would be a good time to read this, as long as you're not expecting Halloween vibes. Aside from that, for those of you who are curious about this title, Usher's Passing was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Fall of the House of Usher. And even though, in my opinion, it's not mandatory that you read Poe's classic in advance, I do think that having read the classic does allow you to have more insight and it gives a greater level of depth to the prologue that McCammon has given us. With that said, I would also like to share the fact that I buddy read this with my good friend Tammy, as well as my good online friends Hanny and Blake. And even though Blake felt like Usher's passing wasn't really his cup of tea, and Tammy felt like the ending was a little too disturbing for her taste, we still had a lot of really great discussions about the characters and the book in general. So for these reasons, I'm really grateful that I read this with them, and I hope they enjoy this review. Anywho, without me rambling on any further, let's go visit Waylon Usher on his deathbed to see which one of his power-hungry descendants will inherit his armaments corporation as well as all of its horrors. Usher's Passing by Robert R. McCammon opens in a Victorian setting and introduces the character known as Hudson Usher, which, even though Hudson had never been mentioned in Poe's short story, one evening he confronts Poe to express how angry he is that Poe had the audacity to release Fall of the House of Usher. Not only that, he makes it known to Poe that he's pretty angry in regards to how his siblings, Broderick and Madeline, had been depicted. Now, in this reality, even though it's been established that some of the aspects of Poe's short story have been fabricated, the disease that his character suffered, known as Usher's malady, is an actual disease that runs through the Usher family bloodline. From here, the plot jumps to present day, which by the book standards is the 1980s. And during this time, its focus shifts to the protagonist known as Rix Usher. Then, after a brief introduction, it's established that Rix is a horror author who's struggling with his new novel. He's a widower, and he has also unfortunately inherited his family's ailments. Shortly thereafter, Rix learns that his abusive father Waylon is on his deathbed. And even though father and son have not been close whatsoever, Waylon wants Rix to return home to Usherland. So, despite the two having differences, Rix decides to fulfill his father's final wish and return to their property in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Which, during this time, it's revealed that the Ushers are nothing more than a group of elitist tycoons who have achieved wealth through their armaments business that had began generations ago. Then, as tensions rise among the dysfunctional Ushers in their current mansion, a mysterious lodge which neighbors them enters plot. And early on, it's established that Hudson had built this lodge when he had relocated to the area. But eventually it's revealed that this lodge is tainted by nightmarish memories and dark family secrets. Aside from the money-hungry Ushers, a subplot forms around a young teenage boy named Newland who lives nearby on Briartop Mountain with his family. And following the disappearance of his younger brother, it's established that Usherland and Broadtop Mountain are both the home base for two horrific legends. One of which is a death-like figure known as the Pumpkin Man, and the other is actually the Pumpkin Man's familiar that comes in the form of a horrific Black Panther known as Greedy Guts, which between the two, over the years, they have been responsible for approximately 300 missing children. Added into the mix, another subplot forms around a reporter named Raven who works for her father's local paper. But while she intends to pick the Usher family for details regarding Waylon's condition, and she hopes to find answers to the missing case of Newland's little brother, she eventually finds herself caught in an unsuspected scenario that's full of murder and mountain magic. Then, as an unforgettable climax builds, Raven joins hands with Newland and Rix to face down a generational evil, specifically one that has profited off of human slaughter ever since Hudson relocated to the Blue Ridge Mountains. Usher's Passing was published in 1984 by Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston. And in 2021, a limited run hardback was printed by Cemetery Dance Publications. Following its original release, in 1985, it won Best Book for the Alabama Library Association's Alabama Author Award, and until that moment, a horror book had yet to win that title. For the fall-winter 1990 issue of Journal of Popular Literature, Marion Motley Carcashet wrote an essay called The Call of the House of Usher, the Poe element in Robert McCammon's Usher's Passing. In this, she stated McCammon's novel is more than just a good horror novel. It is also a game between author and reader, a scavenger hunt not only for subtle allusions to the life and works of Edgar Allan Poe, but also for the echoes of Poe's favorite themes and literary devices, all employed in such a way that they become McCammon, never merely derivative of Poe. In an interview conducted by Hunter Gottlieb, McCammon revealed the character Rix in Usher's Passing is autobiographical. In real life, Robert McCammon was raised by his wealthy grandparents who expected him to meet their high standards, such as they wanted him to keep their house, which was built in the 1930s, in its dilapidated condition without making any changes, and they wanted him to carry on the family business of furniture sales. Yet, much like Rix's character, McCammon decided he had to be his own person. Also, it should be noted Robert R. McCammon's middle name is Rick, and many of the jobs that Rix had in Usher's Passing is a reflection of the jobs the author worked in real life. Fun facts! Here's a few things you might not know about Robert R. McCammon. Raised in Birmingham, Alabama, Robert R. McCammon received his B.A. in journalism from the University of Alabama, and he is one of the founders of the Horror Writers Association. McCammon published his first novel, Ball, at age 26, and in 1991, his novel Boy's Life won the World Fantasy Award for Best Novel. After his release, Gone South, due to wanting to spend more time with his family and suffering from depression and exhaustion, McCammon went on a writing hiatus. In 2002, McCammon returned with his comeback novel, Speaks the Nightbird, which introduced the protagonist, Michael Colbert, who is currently featured in a series of 9 novels. Now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoiler segment, which, if you haven't read this book before, I'm about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience for you. So, if you would like to click away, just scroll down to the comments, and you'll see that I have a pinned comment at the top with the timestamp in it. Once you click that timestamp, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this. So, ready, set, go! Since everyone's had the opportunity to click away, I would like to talk about a few of my favorite moments. First up is the scene when Newland encounters Greedy Guts outside of his home. Now, prior to this, Newland's little brother Nathan had been abducted by the Pumpkin Man while Newland was trapped in a briar patch. And while he remained helpless, he noticed where there was a hunter's knife on the ground nearby a dead body. But since the hunter's knife was just out of reach, he had no other choice but to imagine the weapon in his hand. Which, to his surprise, after imagining this, the knife magically floated over to him, where he was able to cut himself free and run home. A couple of nights later, while trying to make sense of everything, Newland experiments with the knife that had floated over to him because he thinks it's magical. However, in the process of doing this, he discovers that instead of the knife being magical, he actually has the power to levitate objects. Shortly thereafter, Newland's mother catches him using his abilities, and she explains that his father had the same power. Also, she continues forward by saying that Newland's father was obsessed with the Usherland property because there was a beautiful voice that would beckon to him. Even still, he resisted the urge to check out Usherland because he knew if he did, he would return as a different person. Which, it's at this moment Newland realizes that Usherland has been calling out to him as well. Then, after that's established, one night Newland dreams that his father is calling to him from the Usherland Lodge. But before the dream can advance, he wakes up to his dog barking at his bedside. And it's at this dreaded moment that he hears the roof creaking and moaning overhead. Then, to see what's going on, he grabs his lantern and holds it up, and this is when he sees the roof denting inward because of something huge walking across the top of their house, which he eventually realizes that the prowler is none other than Greedy Guts. Since Newland knows Greedy Guts isn't going to leave unless blood's spilled, he runs outside with his father's shotgun to blast this thing to Kingdom Come. And while he's looking around, Greedy Guts creeps out from under a pickup, where Newland starts blasting away. But after Greedy Guts avoids all of the bullets and he gets ready to pounce, Newland imagines this blue brick wall that Greedy Guts cannot pass. Even still, despite there being a barrier, Greedy Guts tries to attack. And by doing so, an invisible force knocks him off his paws and crashes him into a nearby tree. Which, this is enough for Newland and his mother to return inside to safety, and it causes Greedy Guts to hightail it out of there. Then, after everything's settled, it's revealed that the Mountain Man had watched from a safe distance, and he had used his power to help Newland. This whole segment was so badass. Like, for starters, when the roof was getting dented in because of Greedy Guts walking on top of the house, all I could think was, oh my God, if this damn thing gets inside, they are so totally screwed. And I was so focused on Greedy Guts getting inside the house, it didn't even register to me that Newland could be a badass. So when he grabbed his father's shotgun and ran outside to blast it to hell and back, you can only imagine how much my adrenaline was pumping during this time. Also, due to how Greedy Guts was described, he was every bit of nightmare fuel that I imagined, plus some. Like, for starters, there's just something about a ferocious wild beast in the dark that makes my heart race and my asshole clench. And secondly, I don't know why, but all of these additional features that was added to Greedy Guts, like his rattling tail, somehow they just made him feel like a greater threat. And it's just, I don't know why, but it totally worked for me. Aside from the creature design, I feel like it was really a brilliant choice that McCammon decided to utilize a Black Panther to pay homage to Poe's classic story, The Black Cat. Also, I really love the supernatural aspect here, especially of the blue brick wall that went up so Greedy Guts couldn't pass. My second favorite moment is the hallway scene, where Rix discovers exactly how bad his father's condition has gotten. So, prior to this, the detail is pretty vivid on how Waylon has become more and more hypersensitive with every passing day because of Usher's malady. As a matter of fact, one day it got so bad that he had all of the electricity turned off at Usherland because the sound of the electrical currents going through the wires was too much to bear. Aside from his senses becoming intensified, his white blood cells are consuming the red, his body is feeding on itself, and his brain cells and bones are being broken down and devoured. Not to mention, he's releasing this putrid smell that is so awful. People have to wear two face masks in order to be around him. Anywho, one particular night after Rix has had sex with his sister-in-law and fallen asleep, he eventually wakes up and finds where a mysterious stranger has run across his room and entered the hall. Which, of course, Rix pursues the stranger to see what's going on. And when he approaches him, he sees that the stranger was in fact his father. With this confrontation, Rick sees that his father is transformed into this Walking Dead type of figure where his flesh has turned gray and fissures are covering his skin, which ooze this horrible, gross yellow pus. And if that's not bad enough, his father's eyes are about to pop out of their sockets, his ears have turned into these rotted nubs, and his jaw is hanging on for dear life where it's exposing his blackened gums. And when the man tries to scream, his flesh is so tight it causes his skin to rip. Y'all, this moment was repulsive as hell, and it totally got under my skin due to the body horror elements, which, as many of you know, body horror freaks me the hell out, but at the same time, I love it because I love to have my boundaries pushed. Secondly, I love how this felt like it was a good nod to Poe's classic story, The Facts in the Case of M. Vladimir, which, in my opinion, is one of Poe's scariest stories. And to be honest, I should have known something like this was coming because while McCammon was giving nods to Poe here and there throughout the novel, I should have known, like, how are you going to create a book that's honoring Poe and not give a nod to this ghoulish tale? And so I should have been prepared, but I wasn't. Also, it did truly creep me out because this whole moment plays on what horrors hide in the shadows late at night. My final favorite moment is the grand finale. Now, leading up to this, Greedy Guts had killed Boone and Cat. Rix had been chosen to lead the family business, and the Usher's butler, known as Edwin, outed himself as the Pumpkin Man while explaining that he and his wife had been grooming and prepping Rix to take Waylon's spot. So, once all of that's established, Edwin takes Rix to the lodge so they can meet with the landlord. Meanwhile, Newland and Raven are traveling an underground tunnel that leads to the lodge, but at the same time they're being hunted by Greedy Guts. Even still, despite the danger they're in, they make it to their destination at one piece. But once they get inside and take in their surroundings, they realize they're in a chamber full of slaughtered children, and standing before them is Edwin and Rix. As the plot thickens, everyone's attention is brought to this huge pendulum and tuning forks that's located in the middle of the chamber, which Edwin activates to give everyone a brief demonstration. Then, as the pendulum picks up momentum, it works in unison with the tuning forks, so it becomes this powerful sonic weapon of mass destruction that can trigger earthquakes. Which, after Edwin turns the device off, he brags that the powers that be are working on miniatures of this device to sell to the military because its effects are actually worse than the A-bomb. Also, as a side note, as far as the slaughtered children are concerned, it's noted that whenever a new usher rises to power, they become a cannibal. So because of their bloodthirst, over the decades, Edwin's family has slaughtered around 300 children to serve up to the patriarch. Now, even though Edwin expects Newland to become the Pumpkin Man for Rix, Newland determines that role just isn't for him. So, with his mind made up, he stabs Edwin with his knife and he uses his powers to animate the surrounding chains that disembowel Greedy Guts. But with Edwin breathing his last breath, his death actually sets the pendulum into motion once again. From here, as the lodge begins to tremble, Raven, Rix, and Newland run into the tunnel for safety. And as they're trying to escape, Greedy Guts is pursuing them with his entrails in chains dragging behind him. Even still, Newland is able to use his powers once again, where he throws Greedy Guts off of his paws and he breaks his head in two, which finally kills the damn thing. Then, as all of them are able to exit the tunnel, they see the lodge and pendulum finally collapse. Nonetheless, this doesn't change the fact that Rix has become the president of Usher's Armaments. And even though he's been pretty anti-war throughout the entirety of this book, he questions if he should be like his family and capitalize off the war, or if he should simply close shop. Y'all, considering how McCammon had reworked the Black Cat and the facts in the case of M. Valdemar for this novel, I should have known that he had something brilliant in store for A Pendulum, because this was the perfect nod to Poe's classic story, The Pit and the Pendulum. Now, with that said, I was really surprised to see how McCammon was able to upgrade the pendulum into a weapon of mass destruction. Which, I say this because in Edgar Allan Poe's original short story, the pendulum could only kill one person at a time. And yeah, it's a pretty horrific device, so that was really grotesque. But in this case, McCammon took it a step further and reimagined it for a whole other generation of horror. And instead of it just taking out one person at a time, it can actually wipe out a whole city or town with just one swoop, which, to be perfectly honest, is badass. Also, as we have nods to Poe throughout this novel, I really love how McCammon stayed true to the original fall of the House of Usher and had the lodge collapse upon itself, which, to be honest, felt like chef's kiss. On a deeper level, I was really happy to see McCammon portray rich people as cannibals, because metaphorically, when this is normally seen, it's a reminder of how rich people have exploited those less fortunate and have exhausted all of their resources until there's nothing left for those who are in poverty. And even though the idea of eating children is pretty grim, I felt like it was necessary here, as it shows how people of this caliber will continue to take and take and take from future generations until there's no generation to actually have a future. Other than that, I was really happy that Rix's story ended on a note where he had yet to actually shut down Usher's armaments. And the reason I say this is because I really liked Rix. I wanted him to succeed, I wanted him to rise above, and yeah, he does live to see another day. But we don't know if he made the right choice. And the book earlier mentioned that his father had been a decent guy before he had received the scepter, and now that Rix is the owner of the scepter, does this mean that he's gonna become what he hated the most and start walking in his father's footsteps? Like, it just messes with my head, and I love that. Furthermore, even though the novel ends with Newland's perspective, we still are not given closure on what happens next, because while Newland is walking about, he hears what he thinks is a pendulum swinging nearby, but he can't be certain. And I think this is a brilliant way to end the book because it's very unsettling. And I say that because earlier in the novel, it had been mentioned that Newland's father had a premonition of an area that had been just destroyed by war. And if Newland has inherited his father's powers, then perhaps he was receiving a premonition here. Specifically one that indicates the future is going to be pretty damn bleak. I would like to take the opportunity to bitch. Y'all, just about every single usher in this book was nothing more than a money-hungry, bloodthirsty, capitalistic, prolapsed pig's ass. And if you think that's bad, their helpers Edwin and Cass, in my opinion, were actually worse because they were enablers and they were also groomers. Not to mention, they served up slaughtered children to these rich bastards no differently than Uber Eats would serve up Mickey D's to my voluptuous ass. Anywho, back to the ushers. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a hot minute because even though Waylon Usher was a walking sewer, he at one time had been a decent person. That is, until he received the scepter. So, because of this, I think his level of assholism had been influenced by the scepter. And, of course, that worsened once he rose to his level of power and he took on the legacy of his family. However, that little titty baby named Boone was nothing more than a man-child who tormented ricks, exploited people with disabilities, and gambled away the family money. Also, whenever a pity fuck arose, all he did was grind his little gherkin against his unamused gold-digging wife named Puddin'. Which, by the way, who in the hell proudly introduces themselves as Puddin'? I mean, my God. Can't you just imagine the jokes there? Snatch Puddin'. As I was saying, almost every single man in this book is a bastard. And I really do hope that Rix continued to fight the good fight and he didn't abandon his morals. But, of course, after learning about Rix's family history, I don't think things bode too well for the Rixter. Usher's Passing by Robert R. McCammon is a prime example of how classic literature can inspire new nightmares. And as far as characters were concerned, I really found myself becoming quickly invested in the well-being of three protagonists. And aside from McCammon showing how well he can create heroes, I think he did a pretty damn good job of creating original villains as well. Which, because of how everyone was constructed with their backstories and how they interacted, I feel like these are characters that I won't forget. Aside from that, this book focused on quite a few different themes, some of which had already been established by Poe with his classic Fall of the House of Usher. But coattailing onto those, I noticed where this book also zoned in on subjects like toxic bloodlines, the potential fall of a family corporation, good versus evil, and how war can be profitable. Character-wise, McCammon shines with his development. Like, when he wants to create a hero to root for, he gives you some pretty good heroes. But at the same time, when he wants to create a villain for you to hate, he knows how to create that villain. And because of the variety of colorful personalities that we were given, I really felt like these were characters that meshed well together. But out of all of the protagonists in this book, even though I did enjoy the Mountain Man and he did feel rich with his lore and everything, Rix, Newlin, and Raven were my favorites simply because I was more interested in their backstories and I was curious to see what they were going to bring to the table. Now, with that said, this does not mean that the Mountain Man was not important, because he was a very important character as he was able to elaborate on why things were happening, and he was able to save Newland's ass quite a few times. Even still, although I enjoyed Newland and Raven's backstories, it was Rix's backstory that fascinated me the most. And I think the main reason why is because I found it interesting that his family's corruption went all the way back to the Victorian era, and during that time, we see how each generation contributed some toxic form of greed or corruption to the family line, which led to the unforgettable climax that we saw in the lodge. Other than me having a good time with the dysfunctional Usher family, I noticed where each of the lead protagonists came from completely different backgrounds on the economic scale. And because of that, it felt like McCammon deliberately brought together high class, middle class, and poverty to show that in order to triumph over evil, we all have to unite. Also, I felt like everyone's role was a metaphor. For example, we have the ushers who represent corporate power. Then we have those who groom and enable the powerful, which I'm avoiding the names of these particular antagonists due to spoilers. Then we have those who benefit off of corporate power, which in the case of this book would be high ranking military officials as they use the ushers' products. Aside from them, we have the everyday person such as Newlin and those on Briartop Mountain who suffer because of the actions brought on by those who are in power. And last but not least, we have the reporters such as Raven and her father who attempt to document everything accurately, but as they're trying to do their job, they're met with a great deal of conflict. Theme-wise, I noticed where this book focused on toxic bloodlines. And primarily, even though you might try to distance yourself from negative family members, you can't escape what's in your blood or your family tree. Even still, despite your lineage, you can always try to be a better person than those who came before you. Also, as I previously mentioned in the Story Behind the Story segment, McCammon explained that his grandparents had high expectations for him that made him feel burdened. And in this novel, it's really obvious to see that McCammon explored his emotions through Rix's character. Like, for example, Rix wants to leave Usherland behind and be free of all of his family's expectations. But at the same time, he's literally tethered to that property due to the malady that his bloodline suffers. So for Rix, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't circumstance. Like, on one hand, he can go live his own life and suffer. But on the other hand, he can remain at Usherland and live up to his family's expectations and be completely miserable. Which I feel like a lot of people who are burdened to please their family are familiar with these emotions. And as a side note, much like Poe's Fall of the House of Usher, this book is full of family tragedy, especially when it comes down to power struggle. Another subject I noticed was the potential fall of a corporation. Now, when I first read Poe's original classic, I felt like it provided readers with a metaphoric visual of a bloodline falling apart. And while McCammon stays true to the Usher bloodline deteriorating, as well as having a location collapse, we also gain insight into what would happen if the Usher's corporation ended with them. So even though Usher's armaments has caused more harm than good, this does pose a question of morality. Specifically one that asks, is it right to make a worker lose their job because you disagree with the company they represent? Which, no matter what answer you give here, this leads to the subject of corporate greed, which leads to the subject of how workers are exploited and are kept at a poverty level so they don't have an opportunity to save money in case their job closes. Which, in turn, this shows how the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. Another subject I noticed was the age-old battle between good versus evil. Now, one thing that really stood out to me in this book was when the mountain man explained to Newlin that the only purpose of evil is to destroy good. And in my opinion, what better way than to explore this topic than with the subject of war? And without giving away any spoilers, I would just like to note that internally and externally, this book is a huge power struggle between good versus evil, which, because of the occurrences that happen throughout its pages, we see that the decisions of a corrupt person in power can affect future generations for years to come. Also, since good versus evil is a primary focus of Usher's passing, this book does end on a note that doesn't necessarily give the reader the closure they would prefer. Which, even though some people hate this type of ending, I think it's brilliant due to the conversations that it can inspire. Tagging on to that, another main focus of this work shows how war is profitable. For example, this is seen by how the Usher family has been able to financially thrive throughout their bloodline by selling weapons of mass destruction to the military. And as a result, we see that the majority of the ushers have little to no respect for the well being of others. Yet, while Rix had been fairly adamant in being anti war throughout the majority of this book, eventually he comes to the realization that if he doesn't get a piece of this pie, someone else will. And while it's indicated that Rix might abandon his morals, the book asks us what we would do if we were in his shoes. But anywho, if you've ever wondered how war could be profitable, this book is a great example of how it can be totally profitable if you are a supplier. Aside from the themes I noticed, I felt like this book did a great job by honoring Edgar Allan Poe. And as I started my read, I had no clue that McCammon would actually work Edgar Allan Poe into his plot. So upon seeing that happen, it was a lot of fun, and yeah, I totally fanboyed. Also, it was a lot of fun to see all of the nods that McCammon added throughout, such as his nods to the Black Cat, the Raven, the facts in the case of M. Valdemir, and of course the Pit and the Pendulum. So overall, I felt like McCammon knew what he was doing. I felt like he understood the assignment, and he provided Gothic readers with what they love the most. Y'all, this is one of those circumstances where I feel like I didn't do the book justice by this review because it seems like there's so much more for me to cover that I'm just not touching. But if I did that, we would be working on a video that would probably be an hour to an hour and a half long, and I know y'all have other things to do in y'all's day. But overall, I did not feel like the book scared me or grossed me out. However, there were quite a few times that did creep me out, and I feel like this is a book that's going to stay with me for a long time. Usher's Passing by Robert R. McCammon is a book that I feel will change in the eye of the beholder, not only because of its open ending, but because it asks a philosophical question of if you would be willing to abandon your morals for profit's sake. And while I've never read McCammon before, I feel like this is a really good starter book because it was just a lot of fun, especially with his character development and his nods. That was just totally awesome. And after reading this, I, of course, have added a few more of his books to my bookshelf. But at the end of the day, if you are looking for a Gothic love letter to Edgar Allan Poe that's set in the Blue Ridge Mountains, then I highly recommend you check out this Southern Gothic piece of literature that is ideal for a dreary fall evening. Now that we're at the end of this episode, I would like to thank these amazing people for contributing to my Patreon account. As you can tell, some of the names listed here are creators, so be sure to check out their work. And if you would like to contribute to my Patreon account, I have a link available in the description section of this episode, where for $5 a month, I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos. And if there is a certain profession you would like for me to tie to your name, just let me know and I'll do that. Also, I do have a $10 tier available, where for $10 a month, I'll still give you the shout out as you see here, but I do creepy photography on the side, so at the beginning of every month, I send out one of my creepy photos. From there, you can print it off and do whatever you like with it. So if you're able to do this, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can continue to have a good time together. Also, if you would like to hunt me down on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are all available in the description section of this episode. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you have a great week and sweet nightmares.